Hey Walter, good. How are you? Good. We'll get started and give my leader a minute here to connect. He did want to sit in with us.
Okay, no problem.
How was your weekend? Did you have a good one?
Oh, yeah, it's pretty good about yours. I don't believe the recruiter told me your name. I apologize about that.
My name's Al.
Oh, okay. Nice to meet you, Al.
Thanks. Uh, yeah, so maybe I'll just walk through quickly what the agenda here that I have. So I'll go through this role again, but it may be a little bit more deeper than we did on the phone conversation. Ask about your current role, maybe how you're doing the project manager, scrum master role with your teams, and then just maybe a couple additional questions.
Okay. That sounds good.
Cool. Hmm. I'll give him till 4 o'clock and then we'll begin at that time.
Okay, that's no problem.
Hey, Eric.
Howdy.
All right, let's get started. So I did walk through the agenda that I was going to go through with Walter already. So let me just jump right in here. Eric, would you mind going on mute? Thank you. All right, so Walter, we already discussed this role at a fairly high level, but I wanted to dig into some of the details that we're going to want this candidate to dig into. So I stated before that all of these teams are self-organized. So they are DevOps Scrum teams. They are self-organized for the most part. I'd say to an extent where there's definitely things that we are looking for you to probably start doing with these teams, like let's say retrospectives. But for the most part, they are doing the Scrum processes that they should be doing. But we need that person, this candidate, to be able to make sure that they're following the processes that they should be following, making sure that the leaders are doing what they're expected to do, whether they're running sprint planning or not, whether the product owner is running backlog grooming or not. I assume that in our most recent sort of shift of leadership, that our leaders are still assuming the positions that our previous one was, where they were running sprint planning. However, that may change. So I don't have the details there, unfortunately. But in the event that those leaders were not picking up that responsibility, that would be part of your role. One of the other things that this role is doing is a release management piece. So within GitHub, the project manager who is rolling off of this now. She should probably is rolled off at this point, but she's going to be assuming a program management role within the X-Class initiative. But she's doing a release right now for the teams where in GitHub, she's more or less checking the boxes to make sure that the tickets that are in the build are in the build, that the Jira IDs associated to those changes are in the release, and then subsequently clicking a button. I don't think it's like overly technical, but I do feel like, at least from my position, is that this sounds like a tech lead architect kind of thing, or even a dev team member should probably be doing this. We didn't necessarily explore that yet, but that's something I would like to explore going forward. We more or less would like to just transition that role, basically the roles and responsibilities of the previous PM, and assume them, and then figure out what next steps we need to take from there.
Yes, that makes sense.
So a couple of the things where I wanted to go a little bit deeper, where there's a lot of cross-team or cross-domain collaboration going on. So the way that our firmware releases go are the team pushes a release, it gets cut through GitHub and goes up into the pipeline. From there, it gets picked up by what we call our RDK stack. The RDK teams are essentially the let's call them gatekeepers to how the firmware is getting pushed up to the hardware. So they're doing some checks and making sure that all the cross-team stuff that's going on that people are pushing up into a potential release candidate are actually working across the all channels. So not just within what we're doing, maybe our test pass, but they may fail at the higher level where it's being tested across multiple different features or TV sets. So that's a huge part of the coordination here, is looking out for or letting them know that, hey, we're cutting a release and here are the changes included. Or it could be that they're actually looking for us to pick up specific things from their pipeline. So there is a daily call for that specifically. A weekly call that we currently have has two aspects to it. There's a Hisense TV and an Element TV. So those are both manufacturers. And each manufacturer may or may not be pushing work into us from a external party or external resource. So for example, Hisense may have a feature that they either notice is not working anymore or are calling out a bug. Those are things that are coming in from an external source. They may come in as P0s. P0s to this within this domain are considered high priority, must look at immediately, must address immediately, until it's ultimately determined it's not a P0. It could be a P1 or a P2, meaning that we'll put it in backlog and we'll address it later. But P0s are a huge part of this weekly call to make sure that we are either hearing a call out for our team where they're saying, yeah, we need the RA team to pick something up, or we say to them, or we're saying to them, here's the status on our current tickets. Another portion of this is status. So being able to communicate out all of your statuses, whereas it's either dates, where it is in the pipeline, where it is in development, and when people should expect it to be in a specific place. So a lot of teams are doing this today within these program calls. So what your expectation would be is to make sure that you understand what your delivery dates are, what your status is, and what your expected outcome should be.
Okay.
And then the last piece is what we're calling our OTTX bug scrub. So OTTX is just an old capture for some of our projects in Jira. But essentially what they're doing is each manufacturer could be sending over a number of different items, and teams are just going through and scrubbing to make sure that they are actually bugs. Maybe they're features. If they're features, they get moved into a specific ticket system, ticket queue, excuse me, not ticket system. We're using Jira for everything. But a specific ticket queue where it might not be a bug, it might be a feature. And so like everything's handled accordingly from that perspective. But the other part of that pipeline too is our feature delivery. So while I explained that we have all these things coming in from manufacturers where it could be a bug or it could be a feature request, there are other things from the organization that are coming down from the portfolio level where our business is saying, we would like to see the following things. All of those things that are coming in are feature requests. They are not bugs. So anything coming from our portfolio system, which we're calling WOW, it's just an acronym for ways of working, is just a way for our internal organization to pivot or at least provide direction to the teams on what they would like to see from a feature perspective. And so that is a planning process effectively. If you've ever done quarterly planning with any other company, it's mostly the same. It's very Comcast, but for this process, we're just really looking for the teams to review the work that's coming in, identify the teams that it could be affecting, and then subsequently committing or not committing to the work. So we do that every quarter. Right now, we're in our Q2 planning. Right now, it's probably next week, I think, is our end date. So usually going into the quarter, we have our plan already committed to, and then towards the end of the quarter is when we start the next quarter planning process.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Any questions about any of that?
So for the crosswork that you said, so there is a big it's pretty much a big team meeting. You said that was weekly?
Some are weekly, some could be daily, but daily as in like Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, not necessarily Monday through Friday.
Okay. And that's kind of where we would know who's working on what and what team needs to take care of what and what is some kind of impediments that we're seeing that we can try to work out.
Yeah, essentially, there's program managers who are running the overall meeting. Really, where this team fits in is just a silo within that readout. And so all we're asking is that you would pretty much know, I think, going into the meeting what you're bringing to the table as far as changes this week or not, or whether they have something for you. That's when you would hear them call you out and say, "Hey, we need something from RA apps." And that's where you would say, "All right, sure, give me that ticket number. We'll take a look at it." Essentially, that's kind of the coordination.
Yeah, so it's like a big PI meeting, just making sure we have everything right for the next sprints coming up. That's correct.
Yeah, I mean, and prioritization too. So I think a lot of that sometimes is P0 work, which is high priority. A lot, a lot of times, I think the part of the P0 process is really determining if it's a P0 or not. So working with the teams to figure out, okay, is this a bug? Yes. Okay, is this definitely a P0? Is this affecting production? Yes. Okay, then we need to get on this as soon as possible. Or you might determine, well, this is a bug, but it's not a P0 because it's worked around by this, that, and the other. So effectively, you would just communicate out that to the teams, put it on the ticket, make sure that everybody understands the status, how we're calling it for that moment.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Cool. All right. So then why don't you just tell us a little bit about your role currently, how you're facilitating the Scrum Master role within your teams?
Yes, for Intuit, I've worked as a project manager and Scrum Master. So I think the working as a project manager throughout my career has helped me with that. So basically, what we do since we're working on a cloud migration project, I'm overseeing a team working on getting the middleware services over to the new microservice architecture. So we're both working on making sure everything is set in place with the code wise for one team, and the next team is making sure everything is moved over to the new cloud and is over there correctly. So what I try to do, since I don't have a development background, is I try to make sure during the daily Scrum meetings that we know exactly what everyone is doing on each team, so we can coordinate effectively and have that open line of communication. So if someone needs something, I can know where to go to get that for them, and make sure that we try to make sure that scope stays in place, because if scope goes out of whack with something like this, it can push us back the timeline. And that's something I try to always avoid, is to try to keep things in a good perspective, especially at the beginning when we have what we planned for the sprint, because that's where sprint planning is so important to me, is that this is what we're doing for this sprint. If something goes outside of that scope, we have to move it to the next sprint to make sure that we can actually get something accomplished that we set out to do. So, and that's kind of big with a project like this, because it can be kind of difficult since the legacy frameworks don't speak directly to the modern architecture, and the developers often have polite discussions over how the best way to do that. And I try to make sure to mitigate and see what would be the most effective way, what would be, it will keep us on the time frame that we have set in place, and we would make sure we don't go over budget and make sure the stakeholders are all happy with everything's how that's being over. So I try to make sure that we stay in that solid time frame. And again, I think the communication is the most important thing on big projects like this, just to make sure that everyone feels like they're in a good place and the culture is right on the teams that are working on these kind of projects, and that we can accomplish what we set out to do during a sprint.
So give us an example of how you are managing these teams simultaneously. Assuming that you have multiple teams that you're sort of working with, how are you aligning each team's priorities to make sure that you're giving each team the amount of time that you think they need?
Yes, the best way that I try to do that is to make sure that everyone knows that my emails are open, my messenger is open, that they can always come to me when they have something, and that if a meeting needs to be held with certain individuals that are working on a specific bug or feature, that make sure that happens. I always make sure I have time for that, especially with the team working on implementing the new microservice architecture. So I think that's again where we're just talking to people and having that kind of servant leader attitude is where I'm here to help you. That is my job to help you. You can come to me if there's help, and then we need to coordinate with multiple teams. That I am here for that. That is my role. And if we need to speak to a project manager overseeing it of the when we have a scrum meetings, that I make sure that I do that and that we can effectively communicate everything that's going on, because it's a very big collaborative team effort, and I think that's very important to make sure that I'm kind of the conduit for all of the conversation, and that we can make sure that we are working together and working in the same mind, so we can get what we need to be done in a specific timeline.
And you mentioned you're not a developer, so how do you establish relationships with your developers to make sure that that communication is what it needs to be?
It's helpful that one of my closest friends is a developer, so knowing, just being curious enough to, even though I can't really have an opinion because I don't know too much about it, but just having the curiosity to ask or look something up is, oh, okay, that's kind of what Python is, and that's how that's different from C# or something like that. So it's just being able to just listen and see why they have this opinion, or why they think this is a good way to code, or why they want to code this way, even though that's not my background and I can't really correct them, but I can listen to various opinions and say, like, we think this is going to go faster, and it's not going to create it's not going to create any catastrophic effect, that we can go ahead and do that, since it's going to keep us on the time frame. And if we need to do something longer or reassess it, we can do that, because I think making sure bugs are stomped out is the most important thing, because that can cause a gigantic issue on any project, especially if it's customer facing in the long run. We don't want that. That hurts business in the long run. So that's kind of what I always prioritize, especially dealing with Intuit's data, and that's personal security issues. Like, we make sure that all this stuff gets moved over correctly, so we don't have a security issue later that comes into a big media spectacle. So I always try to make sure that if there are any bugs, we try to get that worked out as quickly as possible, and try to tell that to the teams. Like, then we can get to the features. And since I have experience as a project manager, I know how to speak to the project managers. Like, this is why I think this is the best idea, and if a stakeholder has a question about that, this is why I think that, and going from there. So I think that's kind of how I can speak to developers and just work with them. It's just having respect for them as human beings, and the independent work that they're doing, and knowing that they're professionals, and just communicating with them in that way.
So part of this role is a hopeful establish a strong relationship with the product owner. So give me an example of a time where something went wrong with your product owner, and how did you solve or overcome that?
There can be sometimes differences of opinions on how long or how in budget something could take, and I do remember that, like, several years ago. And it really comes down to what I honestly think is having the courage to talk it out and be like, okay, we can try to implement this feature, but this is definitely going to go over budget. We're going to probably need to bring in more developers to work on it, and that's not what the stakeholders want. That's not what you said you wanted, but you're saying let's go ahead and do that, and then we can get it done. It's like that's going to stress out the team. That's going to change our capacity. Our velocities might even go down because of that, because you're stressing them out and working on this one thing. So I don't think that's the best idea. So we had back and forth conversations for a couple of days, and until we came to an agreement to push some parts of that project back to another sprint, so we could get what I felt needed to be done and what the team could handle during that time frame.
And then what about an example of a time where you communicated a situation that the team did not deliver? How did you do that? How did you approach it, and what was the outcome?
It kind of goes back to what I was speaking about before. A bug came up when we were supposed to be implementing a new feature several years ago, and that the bug was a, a fairly big priority, and so we didn't get the feature done in that sprint. And some of the developers were bothered by that, but it's I feel like it's my role as a Scrum Master to keep morale up. And I was like, well, we didn't plan for this to happen, but we had enough capacity to get the bug taken care of, and that's what's important. And that it's okay. It's not going to cause us a long term problem because we didn't get the feature done. Now we can get the feature done later. We stopped a bug from becoming a larger issue, which could have hurt the project many months down the road. And instead, we made sure that didn't happen. So we should be proud that we did that, and let's keep going forward and keep moving. So I think when something goes wrong, the Scrum Master or project manager, but both of them can't panic, or that's just going to go through the team, and that can just hurt everything that you're working on, especially if it's like near the beginning or in the middle of a project. That could just cause a culture that you don't really want to have, of people panicking and walking on eggshells and being afraid that a stakeholder is going to come in and have a gigantic issue with all the work being done. So I think that's kind of a big thing, is kind of being kind of like a psychologist a bit, and just being sure, okay, we got this done. This is why we did it. We can move forward. It's not going to be a gigantic problem.
And then how would you rank protecting a process? So how important is process to you, and how would you handle a specific, maybe you can give a specific example of how process helped you?
I think especially when you're looking at the agile system and inside of the Scrum framework, it's on its surface, it looks like that it's a wide open field where everyone just goes and do their own thing, but it's really an extremely process oriented thing where independence plays a key role, and everyone doing their work without having someone hovering over and plays a key role. So I think the process of that, and the process of having a project plan that you can stick to, and the daily stand up where we come and talk about what was done. Was there any impediments? Do we need to quickly talk about something? And might have meetings after that to make sure there's no impediments. I think that entire process, while it feels very free and open, I mean, in essence, it is, but it's a very structured thing where you can work free and communicate to make sure that everything gets done, but everyone has kind of that stress and worry lifted off their shoulders of having like a manager kind of look over them at all times. So I think the process of the agile methodology is something that I think helps large projects, especially a lot, even small projects. It helps just to have in your minds, like, we're doing this, this is working, we can continue going forward in this direction, and we're gonna meet our goals, and we're gonna deliver what we need to deliver, and things of that sort. So I think I think process is a gigantic uh, factor in making sure everything stays on schedule and stays on budget.
Yeah. What interests you about Comcast? So is there something in particular that you saw that we're doing that draws you to us? Is there anything that you want to get out of this role that you're looking for, either short or long term?
I think what you were describing before, well, the first time we spoke, was very very interesting. I haven't quite worked in a field like that, and I think that's going to be very interesting. I do like technology. I do like learning about those things. I do like seeing the back end of how how X comes here, and how this happens on the back end of a company. So I think those things are very interesting and fun to me, and to work in that and to help deliver that is would be very exciting. So I do think that's very unique in the software. Well, the hardware itself is very interesting as well. That would be fun to look into, to see how that operates and how that's changing things for the future of entertainment and TV, and how that all works as well. So I think that's to me is a very very interesting to see where things going, because that could influence gaming, that could influence podcasts, things like YouTube. I mean, like, it could influence all kinds of different things, and yeah, that's a very fun thing that does interest me to work on.
As a Scrum Master, do you have any specific values that you hold close to you?
Being a servant leader is one of the big ones. I was like, I think it's very important to know specifically how to deal with differing personalities, because you're always going to run into differing personalities, and you're not always going to immediately click with someone. There might be something going on in their personal lives that causes them to be a little apprehensive. But I think one of the big ideals important to me as a Scrum Master is to communicate with those individuals and talk to them, and learning to work with them and learning to get to know them in a professional manner, so we can work together and build a very positive culture. Because I do think that's kind of where the big Scrum value of courage comes in. This you have to put yourself out there to make sure things get done, because in the agile framework, it's very important to go in and say what needs to be said and when it needs to be said, and make sure that everyone stays in the proper mindset of what is going on. So I think the big one for me is communication and being organized, and knowing what needs to be done, and sticking to the plan that was set out in the program implementation stage, and making sure that we have all of that set up and following that. And I think all of that kind of centers around communication and having people they're willing to communicate and work together for a bigger goal.
Do you have any interest in program management?
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely be open to learning more about that role and working. I have not in the past been a Scrum Master and Project Manager, but that's definitely something I would be interested in, and learning how uh, to facilitate that role and work in that role.
All right, Eric, you've been sitting nice and quiet. Do you have any questions for Walter?
Yeah, we've been doing this too much. Still a couple of my questions, but so Walter, I can read your resume, but can you just give me like a summary? It looks like you've focused mostly on financial. What kept you in that industry, and why? Kind of a little bit what Al was saying is why the shift.
Um, I like trying new things. That's kind of what interests me about what's going on at Comcast and the specific role we're talking about. And sometimes it was the best position for me to be in, the best offer. So I stayed in that for a bit of time, and for as banking and everything. And it was something I was getting used to working in and comfortable with, but I did want to try something new. And that's kind of what led me to Intuit, and more of looking into IT types of things. And also also a lot of issues with banks right now, as we just saw a couple of days ago. So it's important to so yeah, I think that it's been a good time, because over the past 5 or so years, there's been a lot of issues in banks, and um, kind of moving on from that seems to be a good thing, as well as also trying new things. So that's kind of why I'm open to trying new things now, and seeing what else I can help develop.
And are most of these full-time work at home or work remote?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And how would you compare and contrast US assignments? Like, do you have a favorite one? Is there one that you like the least? And if so, why?
Um, I would say working on Intuit right now would be my favorite, because it's something a bit new. And I think that is fun to work in a new environment. And um, there were some things at Bank of America I didn't enjoy, but so I mean, banks are a unique ball game, and was some of the regulations that you have to stick to all the time, and making sure those are strictly adhered to, so you avoid fines or being blamed for or something going wrong in that matter. But it's also a lot of security. We'll go into that as well, as far as information security and things like that. So I do, but yeah, I do think working with like data migration right now for the first time has been fun, and working in the more IT related field, and moving on to something more technology based right now, like what you guys are working on, would be a good step in a moving in a right direction for me.
All right. What's your career goal?
Career goal. Um, that's a good question. I think one of my biggest things have always been to not hate going to work, even if it's remote, to not hate it, because that can happen. That can be very stressful. I'm just reading things about how that's going on for millions of Americans, especially during COVID and the Great Resignation and things like that. It's like I don't want to be in a position where I just absolutely positively dread going to work. So I think that's a career goal of mine, is to always be in a place where I am mentally happy where I'm at and where I'm working and whom I'm around, so I can kind of have fun while I'm doing it
Right.
and not hate it, even though it is a professional setting. But I do think if you're having fun or you're in that right mindset, it's good for your wellness. It's good for everyone's wellness around you, and it builds a good culture at a company.
And of the jobs on your resume, were there any that you hated?
Hated? No, I wouldn't say directly just absolutely positively hated. No. No, I wouldn't say that. No.
Something you wouldn't return to?
I would like to not return back to banking, especially at this point.
All right. You got any questions for us, Walter?
I know I believe it was last week when we spoke, you mentioned that the onboarding process would be 2 or 3 more weeks. Is that correct? Or did I misremember that?
No, we're looking to actually make a decision this week. So let me just look at my calendar here. I believe we have like 10-ish days to get this role onboarded. So it would effectively be maybe starting the 27th. Eric, does that sound right to you?
Yeah, it depends on when we get through the process. Usually, when we select a candidate, then finance will review their rate. So there's a financial step, and then there are some administrative requirements of the vendor and the candidate. And then we get them onboarded, and we have to get you a laptop. We have this sent to you. But other than that, yeah, I would shoot probably for 10 days out. What does that take us in
24th?
calendar?
That would be like
Yeah,
the end of next week.
yeah. So I guess 27th is probably more realistic. Are you looking to start sooner or later?
Oh, I would be perfectly fine with that timetable.
Okay. All right.
And
Cool.
the current also the current projects that are being worked on, you said that's a long-term continuous project as well?
No. So this is currently a 7-month contract with potential to extend beyond that 7 months.
Okay.
Right now, it's not clear if that's happening or not. I think the Spidey sensors are telling us that it's probably going to, but no guarantees past 7 months
Okay.
today.
Good. That sounds good. That's perfectly fine.
Yeah. So I would even answer it this way, that it's actually one of our existing products, which is an XClass TV, and we were going to rebuild our tech stack, and then we got a purchase order for more of them.
Right. Right.
So obviously that's going to drive where this team goes. There's still the need to move over to the tech stack, and that'll probably happen while we're still maintaining this particular product. But the experience with this particular product is similar to our other products. So there is the ability, based on performance, if there's opportunities to move into a different product.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds great. Like I definitely, yeah, I'm definitely interested and definitely would like to join the team.
Okay, great.
Cool. Well, we will reach out to the recruiter with our decision. Eric and I probably will chat right after this. There's another candidate that we also wanted to discuss, and then we'll reach out to our recruiter and with our decision.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that.
Thanks, Walter.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Walter. See ya.
Oh, goodbye.
Bye.
Felt like 6 years. Oh.